everyone, and welcome to the 14th episode in our AI and You podcast series. Today is Monday, October 5th, 2020, and I'm your host, Vicar Saidi. I'm a computer scientist and engineer, a lecturer, and a consultant. I'm also the author of several books. My most recent book is about artificial intelligence and is titled The Genome Affair. The Genome Affair is a work of speculative fiction. It examines what the world might be like if some of the more extraordinary capabilities forecast to be realized in AI over the next 20 to 30 years were actually realized today. Given the growing list of frightening existential threats humankind now faces, the book pays particular attention to the impact AI is expected to have on world affairs. The book is available in ebook format for those who prefer to read on a digital device, but it's also available in a high-quality paperback edition. The Genome Affair is available on Amazon, so I hope you'll take the time to read it and to leave a review. Book reviews are very helpful for writers. I'm available to give talks on artificial intelligence and its related technologies, and on the impact AI is expected to have on our world. If you'd like to get in touch with me to arrange a web-based event or consulting meeting with your company or organization, you can find my contact info in the podcast notes below. And now, on to today's podcast. In our last podcast, episode 13, I talked about artificial intelligence and the future of work in Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. In today's podcast, episode 14, I'll be talking about artificial intelligence and its implications for authoritarianism and democracy. Let's get started. Democracy is a very fragile ideology of governance. Conversely, authoritarianism is a very hardy ideology and can take root virtually anywhere with little effort. Commercial, environmental, political, and social conditions almost always lend themselves to the rapid enabling and nurturing of authoritarian states, whereas democracy, although still the most desirable of all forms of government ever established, is very difficult to nurture and even more challenging to sustain. This is because democracies endeavor to provide freedoms, protections, and rights for all citizens, whereas authoritarian societies seek to consolidate wealth, privilege, and power in the hands of the few, the aristocracy and the ruling classes. Authoritarian societies crush all forms of dissent and are unaccountable to the citizens, as they are above the law. These systems have no separation of power. There is no independent legislature, judiciary, or administration. The police are accountable and controlled by the state, and there is no independent or free press. Varying degrees of such forms of authoritarianism are on clear display today in China, many parts of Central Asia, across the Middle East, in Russia, Eastern Europe, and increasingly in India. In virtually every democratic society, authoritarianism and its proponents simmer just below the surface, lurking and waiting patiently, sometimes inciting and facilitating fractures in a democracy. Their goal is to be prepared so that when democracies falter, as they invariably do due to the shortcomings of those charged with its stewardship, the authoritarians are ready to raise their flag. This is why large-scale democracies, as seen in the West, are actually a very recent phenomenon. We have had democratic city-states in the past, for example in Athens 2,500 years ago, but this lasted for only 200 years and never at a national level. Essentially, humankind has lived under various forms of authoritarianism for most of our history. When democratic states do regress or fail, for the first time in history, we face the risk of technology-enabled dictatorships, as authoritarians employ widespread data collection, which is then processed by artificial intelligence. These insights are then used to build and understand our psychological profiles. Now, the authoritarian state can monitor and intimidate us at will. They know our every juvenile and young adult indiscretion, misstep, and transgression, and so much more, and they can use this knowledge to control and silence us. Such control was never possible in Nazi Germany during World War II, or in Stalin's Cold War-era Soviet Union. As sophisticated as the Stasi's intelligence-gathering capabilities were in those times, their spies did not have the ability to get inside our minds and monitor our thoughts, nor was it possible for them to watch everyone. This is no longer the case. With today's AI, along with monitoring and profiling technologies, including facial recognition, we have now enabled data dictatorships. This technology is itself agnostic. It doesn't care how it is being used. It can be deployed for great good or for great harm. However, this might be one of the most dangerous times in history for technology, since AI, data science, and other enabling technologies not only have tremendous power, but their current use has resulted in the most lucrative business model ever conceived, the business model of surveillance capitalism. But as we are observing nearly every day, these very same uses can contribute to the disintegration and erosion of democracy. Those employed by the state can now know us better than we know ourselves. Some countries are using AI, data science, and related tools to strengthen their democracies. Estonia is actually using these to reinforce its democratic institutions. But in most societies, this is not the case. In fact, many democratic governments around the world are reactive rather than proactive, and are waiting for the fallout from such invasive surveillance technology and privacy erosion before responding. Unfortunately, this will very likely be too late. These lazy governments are largely allowing the purveyors of cutting-edge, dangerous technologies to self-regulate their firms to ensure their products and services are ethical and are not dangerous to democracy or society. But there is no example in history of any industry ever having been successful in self-regulation. So the naivete of these governments is actually quite astounding. A strong, well-articulated legal framework is urgently needed before the damage is irreversible. Let's take a look at the damage to society and democracy from fake news. Truth tends to be very nuanced, complicated, and often painful. It takes considerable work to uncover the truth. Conspiracy theories, on the other hand, are usually simplistic and therefore appealing to very large audiences who are either too lazy and disinterested to make the effort to study and learn the truth, or they're simply incapable. Thus, the responsibility falls on the leaders of society to engage at every level and through every medium to inform the people of the truth in a manner they can understand. If we fail in this critical task, then we hand the baton of governance to the authoritarians, who have a much easier time governing, since they have no interest in upholding and propagating truths. Truth does not serve their interests, so instead they propagate simplistic conspiracy theories that are so believable and so compelling to so many who refuse to think critically about what they're hearing on talk radio or reading on social media. The authoritarians are then able to rise to power on the back of these populist waves, thus enabling plutocracies, a government by and for the elites, or even dictatorships where absolute power is consolidated in just a few hands. An important characteristic to be aware of regarding these authoritarian regimes is that once they attain power, they are impossible to extricate from within. The extrication can only be achieved through war brought from the outside or from the willingness of the authoritarian leadership itself to yield power after the system they have presided over experiences economic collapse. This is, in fact, what transpired during the early 1990s and the fall of the Soviet Union. There is much technology companies can do within their capacity to prevent the collapse of democracy, but if it compromises their business model, as it's likely to do, their resistance will be formidable, and change will most likely require some outside force and pressure from civil society and government. In fact, the reason today's banking and e-commerce transactions are so secure is because without this security, the power and wealth of plutocrats and elites, the very people who own these extraordinarily lucrative tech companies, is at risk. The wealth creation engines and underlying business models will fail. But if it is not in the economic interest of technology sector elites to make changes to their business model, even in the interest of protecting democracy from harm, they are unlikely to do so. The evidence of just such a scenario has been on display in recent years, as tech giants have been brought before regulatory and legislative bodies in the US and Europe to answer for the problems to society and democracy from their platforms, but have made so little effort to change. Today, technology is being used to profile citizens for profit in surveillance capitalism and for rigorous control in state surveillance. We need to repurpose these technologies. We need to surveil government and its various agencies and branches so we can make government accountable to society like never before in history. But for this to happen, industry can no longer lobby government for commercial advantage in return for campaign contributions, so this will be difficult to achieve and implement. The coronavirus pandemic has made society largely more accepting of being monitored like never before, and through the use of clever, self-serving arguments and use cases proposed by government agencies and commercial enterprises, this will likely continue once the pandemic crisis is over. Europe has led the world in privacy protection, perhaps because of their historic and painful experience with privacy during the Nazi occupation and the subsequent Cold War, during which surveillance of the general society was a reality of everyday life. But without enacting a comprehensive privacy regime in the West, it's very likely that democracy will continue to erode. Corruption is estimated to cost the world about $3 trillion per year, and is one of the forces most likely to lead to a loss in trust in democratic institutions and the democratic system itself. So the obvious question for a new class of technology companies is how they can develop ways to use artificial intelligence with other leading technological instruments, such as facial recognition, to initiate surveillance of the state. The goal is to identify corruption, catch the perpetrators, and rapidly prosecute them, thereby creating disincentives for such corrosive behavior and ultimately preserve and strengthen democracy and its foundational institutions. This new class of technology companies can also surveil industry. It can leverage the power of AI to enable timely judicial decisions that will send unequivocal signals to all would-be abusers of public trust. In the prosecutor's office and in the judiciary, AI can search through documents several thousand times faster and more accurately than humans. So burying lawyers in an insurmountable mountain of paperwork is no longer a limitation for courts, investigators, and prosecutors. AI agents can also be used to move complex cases through the courts in a very rapid fashion and bring convictions at a rate that can have a chilling effect on abusers of the public trust. Contrary to popular belief, the Western Transatlantic Alliance has not yet collapsed. In fact, despite the inward-looking culture of the current U.S. administration and Republican Party, the cooperation in the Western medical and scientific community to aggregate financial resources, intellectual capital, and technology, such as artificial intelligence, with medical and scientific expertise, to sift through and find vaccines for the coronavirus in such a compressed time frame is undeniably an unprecedented achievement. The normal vaccine discovery cycle of 10 years has been successfully compressed to achieve success in less than 2 years. No authoritarian regime has been able to credibly or safely match this performance. However, if we are not careful, if we are not aware, if society's leaders do not rise to this challenge, the coronavirus pandemic's lasting legacy may ultimately be that it was the event that enabled state surveillance to be normalized in many societies. The likely repercussion of such normalization is to enable the rise and establishment of authoritarian regimes and the subsequent collapse of democracies. Thank you for spending some time with me. I'm trying to follow the TED Talk format, and so I'm keeping these podcasts to about 20 minutes. Let me know what you think. I hope you'll find these insights into artificial intelligence helpful, and I hope you'll read my new book, The Genome Affair. It's on Amazon. Until next time then, this has been the AI and You podcast with author Vicar Saidi.